But the average person, the lady, 55-year-old school teacher who gets a phone call, mom needs to come live with you for a while. She had a fall. She had this, she had that. She goes to the grocery store a week or two later and she's, obviously tired and stressed and everything else. But she, loves her mom. So she's trying to do the best by her mom. And she sees in the grocery store on one of the walls, need help with your loved one, tear this little tag off and call and we'll provide the best care possible. And they have a company name on there. But in reality, it's not a company. It's just a lady and a couple of her friends who are looking to, make some money, and I tell families, it might be $1 or $2 less an hour. And yeah, that might add up over a year's time, depending also on how much care you need. But it could also cost you a lot more too, because if one of those people hurt themselves taking care of your mom, who do you think they're going to come after? They're going to come after you and your mom. And now you got a big problem on your hands. Or heaven forbid, they steal, your mother's wedding jewelry and you can never recover it. Or you're getting ready to go on, vacation with your husband and kids for spring break or winter break. And that quote unquote company calls you the night before and says, yeah, I'm sick. I'm not going to be able to be there. Sorry. Now, how are you going to still take your vacation? There's a lot of pitfalls to that little bit less, hourly rate by going with somebody that says they're a company, but they're in reality not, than just doing it the right way. I don't cut corners when I'm getting my vehicle taken care of because it's my vehicle. There's things you can cut corners on in life, and there's some things that you shouldn't cut corners on. And taking care of someone who's so special and dear to you should not be one of the situations you want to cut a corner.
Looking at it from the other side of the coin, what are some of the mistakes or maybe misconceptions that you see families are making? Obviously, families are trying their best, but they're not necessarily clinical professionals. So what mistakes do you think that they're, or you often see?
Yeah, well, one of them would be, hiring somebody privately rather than an actual, brick and mortar company is a good idea. And I just explained the reasons why I think that is not a good idea. One of the other ones is, families not accepting reality, maybe, of, what their loved one is actually going through and who their loved one is present day. Meaning, we talk with countless families and, it's usually the one who's the boots on the ground, day-to-day person taking care of mom. And then you'll have a sibling or two or three who say, well, I called mom and she's just fine, and them being able to actually be, understanding and accepting of what their parent or their loved one is dealing with. I think families need to just, instead of trying to ignore it and pretend like it doesn't exist, try to get a good understanding of what it is and then trying to co-care together. Well, a son's not going to want to bathe his mom. I understand that. He's not going to want to help with toileting needs for his mom or her personal hygiene. But a son could say, you know what? I'm not local, so I can't be there every day or even hardly at all. But what I could do is I can coordinate all of her doctor's appointments. I can call in and make sure all of her pills are, refilled. I can send out progress notes from her doctor's visits. There's ways that you can still contribute and help support your loved one without actually having to be hands-on for your loved one, which, subsequently will help your sister, brother, whoever the sibling is that is boots on the ground. Because, it shouldn't be one person does it all, because if something happens to that one person, then your loved one's going to be left with nobody there to support them. Then you're really going to have a problem. So I think a lot of it is just, trying to educate yourself as much as possible and take away a little bit of the defensiveness or the, deniability of nothing's really wrong, because oftentimes it's a lot more serious than what you're probably anticipating or even expecting. It's better to just deal with it up front than just to keep kicking the can down the road.